This is Thomas Dojonovic's story from the perspective of his mother, Jody Dojonovic. June 29, 2019. Thomas Dojonovic is walking to his local YMCA to begin his lifeguard shift, and he arrives on time at 11 a.m. Just a half hour before, his mother Jody texted him to see if he needed a ride to work, as it was raining that day. He responded that he was already on his way, and later on in the day, Jody texted Thomas again, asking him about his plans and if he needed a ride home from work. He promptly responded that he wasn't sure and would let her know. Later on, she went to dinner with her daughter and some baseball moms. Thomas had texted her during this time, but she had missed it. He did not text again. She assumed that he had a way home or planned to hang out with his friends. Near 9 p.m., Jody drove home and noticed her husband seemed nervous that Thomas wasn't home and not answering his calls. She asked her husband if Thomas was sleeping, to which he replied no, and she then assumed he was still out with his friends. He responded that it was unlikely as Thomas's backpack was still in his room as he would take it everywhere he went. After texting her son's number and receiving no response, Jody texted his girlfriend and close friends concerning him. One close friend of his said he dropped Thomas off at home around 7:30 when her work shift ended. No one had heard from him since. After an hour of checking back and forth with family, friends, and work, Jody and her husband began a search for Thomas. They began in his room, where they found an unfinished notebook entitled, "My Final Goodbye." Confused and concerned, they walked out to the woods at night, remembering that Thomas would frequently go alone. It was 11 p.m., and despite the dark, Jody and her husband continued their search for Thomas and walked down together in the woods. Only a few hundred yards from their home, they found Thomas, who had tragically taken his life between 7:30 and 10:30 p.m. A few days back, Thomas got himself into trouble, and he had to wait another month before he could test for his driver's license. That night, Jody thought Thomas was annoyed with his parents and went to the woods, which he frequently did when he wanted to be alone. Besides this instance, there doesn't appear to be any signs of Thomas's chosen fate, as he never reached out for help to his family or friends. In the days after his passing, a detective retrieved information from Thomas's phone and discovered several key findings. 2 years prior, Thomas's grandmother passed away, and he was first experiencing puberty, resulting in his body and mind changing. During these 2 years, he experienced horrible nightmares where he often couldn't sleep, but simply played them off as scary stories with his friends. He searched up self-help techniques for the nightmares and voices inside his head as he was subconsciously fighting with himself over what kind of person he was. He tried solving these pains by drinking, vaping, and smoking marijuana, as it was only found out that closer to his death that vaping seemed to help him with his anxiety. He later got into a big fight with his best friend because he forced him to complete a dare of either jumping into a frozen lake or engaging him with a fist fight. Since he disliked physical altercations, he jumped into the lake, where some of his friends laughed at him, while others cheered him on. Upon being asked about this, Thomas didn't want to discuss it as it embarrassed him. 3 weeks before his death, he reluctantly went to a therapist to get new medication for his anxiety. The therapist then determined that he suffered from social anxiety, was very self-deprecating, and was dealing with some depression, but no signs that he planned to take his life. In a text with his girlfriend, Thomas thought he was a burden to his family and loved ones, to which he asked him to talk to his family, where he felt they wouldn't care about him. He later told her that if he left with her, his family would be sad for a while, but would eventually get over it. According to Jody, Thomas's family was open about everything in her home, and his family told him daily that they loved him. His mother still feels confident that Thomas knew she loved him. She's also sure he was loved by many, but was so lost and alone that he couldn't bear to believe this, and it wasn't enough for him to stay alive and take the pain. Furthermore, she felt stigma played a significant role in losing her son, as he was self-sufficient and independent, and came off as a confident young man. She thought he was afraid to be seen as crazy or different for expressing anything otherwise. She felt that he was worried about losing control, and by sharing any of this information with his family, he would go to a hospital or somewhere else he wouldn't want to be. Given all this information, it is possible Thomas would have felt very lonely in his mind with all these horrible things happening to him. All of this provides insight into the broader picture of why Thomas chose his fate. Even though it's been 5 years, I hope Thomas's family and loved ones are doing well with the loss of their dear son and continue to keep his legacy alive. May Thomas Dojonovic rest in peace. While Thomas's story is indeed heartbreaking, his story is unfortunately becoming more common. There is a growing epidemic of mental conditions in Gen Z, especially loneliness, and it's not being talked about nearly enough. Before I get into it, I must state that I am not a mental health professional, and that if you need help, please seek out professional help immediately. These are simply my beliefs and opinions based on what I've experienced and researched. Links for the sources are in the description. In overview, loneliness is a feeling of isolation despite wanting social connections. It is considered a state of mind that makes people feel empty, unwanted, and alone, whether physically alone or not. Loneliness is frequently associated with social isolation, a lack of social skills, and poor mental health. Health risks associated with loneliness range from increased stress levels and antisocial behavior to the worst cases of depression and suicide. As you can see, loneliness does unfortunately indeed kill. But why is this happening more, especially now? I firmly believe that there are two types of loneliness, mental and isolative. We'll cover mental first. Mental loneliness is feeling alone in your thoughts despite being around people and connecting with them. In contrast, isolative loneliness is lonely both physically and mentally. Isolative loneliness is based on mental loneliness, but involves being physically alone with little to no connection. So, complete isolation. Simply lonely in both mind and being. Although somewhat different, both have similar if not the same symptoms, with the only difference being that mental loneliness is lonely in your mind. Remember these types of loneliness, as they will come back later. This will be divided into two segments: causes, specifically the ones more prevalent today, and resolutions to combat them. Note that this documentary will focus mostly on the causes rather than the resolutions. While there is no singular cause of loneliness, two common causes are more relevant today. Poor mental health is a leading cause of loneliness, specifically mental loneliness. This cause isn't particularly unusual. However, the rise of poor mental health is skyrocketing among young adults. Loneliness in these cases is how we think that no one understands the plight we are undertaking. Thus, this cause falls under mental loneliness, as we feel lonely, unvalidated, and misunderstood even when we undergo these mental struggles. It almost seems that our thoughts will never be known, despite now that many of our peers are going through something very similar. Of course, being physically alone during these struggles is possible, so I'm not entirely ruling them out. But the fact is that we most likely feel mental loneliness as we experience these mental problems, such as depression, anxiety, and even low self-esteem. Considering that mental health has been plummeting in recent years, it's safe to say it can cause loneliness. Let's go back to the beginning. The main reason for bringing up Thomas Dojonovic's story is to understand why he and others like him unfortunately decide to take their own lives at such a young age. This, in turn, can give us a glimpse into resolving this mental health epidemic shaping young adults. As said earlier, Thomas suffered specifically from anxiety and later on social anxiety. And anxiety disorders, as a definition, are characterized by repeated episodes of sudden feelings of intense anxiety and fear or terror that reach a peak within minutes. Symptoms include feeling nervous, restless, or tense, an increased heart rate, and a sense of impending danger or panic. As a result, it is possible he suffered from loneliness because no one could truly understand what he was going through, which made him feel isolated. This begs the question, how are anxiety and loneliness connected? One simple reason is that anxiety is often mistaken for loneliness. While it is true that anxiety can cause loneliness, the state of mind can be different. For example, imagine that you're at a friend's party. You have little motivation or desire to converse with anyone besides your friend because you know him and no one else. This is a sign of loneliness itself despite yearning for a meaningful connection. For anxiety, this is different. Anxiety is driven by a fear of social contact rather than a lack of motivation. This is crucial because anxiety, especially social anxiety, can lead to self-isolation and in turn cause loneliness as it prevents you from connecting with your friends and family. Anxiety can make you feel physically, if not mentally, drained and tense most of the time. And we only dived into one of the causes. Tragically, depression has also drastically risen among young adults in recent years. No wonder it can lead to loneliness. Again, you feel invalidated and misunderstood because no one knows what you're going through. Just like with anxiety, loneliness can be connected to depression. Loneliness and depression, in fact, can cause each other, leading to depression symptoms, such as the case when dealing with life transitions, such as a breakup or the death of a loved one. These situations lead to loneliness, which in turn can trigger depression. Also true is that depression can make it harder to find interest in one's beloved activities. So, for instance, imagine you used to enjoy hanging out with your buddies in school. Now, you subtly push yourself away without realizing it as you suffer from depression. Thus, living with depression can make you lonely as you socially withdraw yourself. And even then, loneliness itself can exacerbate depression symptoms and be a consequence. So, what's the kicker? Loneliness is a temporary emotional state, while depression is a mental health condition. Loneliness does tend to weigh you down as heavily as depression, which causes an overlap between the two. Loneliness in this situation can mostly be alleviated by fulfilling needs for connection, but not much for depression. Depression, however, cannot, at least not entirely, and requires treatment from a professional. To the final point, self-image potentially plays a pivotal role. The negative side of it, self-disgust, is possibly the link between depression and loneliness. Add in an illustration. You are invited to a party by a friend, and while there, you notice that a couple of people seem disinterested by your presence and ignore you. It is quite possible they missed you there and were simply conversing. Nevertheless, you feel lonely and desolate, so what do? Jump to conclusions. You see, a lot of the time, self-disgust disguises itself as a convenient scapegoat for your loneliness. Thoughts like, I don't have any true friends, and why would anyone want to see me, creep into your mind's back crevices. Self-disgust often relates to low self-worth, which can force you to fixate on these thoughts, which continue in a cycle of agony that reinforces these ill-perceived beliefs. Even with anxiety and depression, another substantial factor still plays a role in the rise of loneliness. Since the turn of the 21st century, the internet has become essential in our lives in the art of communication. You don't need me to explain why, as you know its power firsthand. But with essentiality comes some drawbacks. Addiction has broadened to social media and the internet itself, as more and more people are becoming chronically online today. This is primarily due to the internet being used as a coping mechanism of convenience when some trouble gets in the way. Unfortunately, many people are chronically online or use the internet obsessively to the point of addiction because they are isolated. Sure, they may have some sort of mental health condition, but that's not true for everyone. I'm observing a trend, an unfortunate one at that. It's a familiar archetype. A young man or a woman with little or no connection with friends, family, or loved ones, using the internet to cope with their loneliness after a long day at work or school. Clearly, this belongs under isolated loneliness because now, not only are you not feeling validated, understood, or even loved upon top of that, but now you have no one to turn to. No one you can talk to and express your true self. Loneliness in both mind and being. A terrible fate at that. And you use your phone or computer to numb the pain when it only worsens it. But yet, you keep coming back anyway. Why? Addiction. That's why. You are addicted. The three culprits, social media, pornography, and even browsing the internet itself can be addictions, if not obsessions. If you're watching this right now, chances are that you're most likely at least suffering from one of these three. There may be more addictions stemming from the internet, but I'm focusing specifically on these three. All are also common behind behavioral addictions, or obsessions from types of behavior that you do. The difference between behavioral addictions and others is that they aren't medically recognized as a disorder. Despite this, they can still be treated as an addiction. TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, and even throw YouTube into the ring. All are social networks, and what can they do? Without checks, they can destroy your mental health. Approximately 10% of Americans can be considered addicted to social media. Yet, how is social media so addictive and why? Social media is so addictive that it has much of the same effect on the brain as drugs and alcohol. The process goes like this. You scroll through your Instagram feed and find exciting new posts from your friends. You like it and even leave a comment below. In turn, you create a post and receive likes and even comments. Thus, dopamine is released in your brain and reacts with your neurotransmitters as you receive positive affirmations. As this is being done, the process creates feelings of pleasure. It forms addiction pathways to encourage the behavior that makes resistance difficult. This process is how it goes for the other two addictions, pornography and the internet. The equation is this. The more you engage with social media, the more your brain will seek it out to get a quick dopamine hit. Thus, this goes on more prolonged periods of social media usage and can lead to dependence. This is primarily due to tolerance forming, or the required level of stimuli needed to get the same amount of dopamine increases. And there's the beginning of an addiction. But why is social media so addictive? Simple. Social media giants such as Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube spend billions of dollars on advertising their content and hiring specialists to make content more addicting to keep the user. This goes into a specialized algorithm that tracks your activity and customizes it to your liking, making you more likely to engage with the posts you're liking, commenting, and sharing. Dr. Nancy DeAngelis, a CRNP and a director of behavioral health, says, social media platforms drive surges of dopamine to the brain to keep consumers coming back over and over again. The shares, likes, and comments on these platforms trigger the brain's reward system, resulting in a high similar to the one people feel when gambling or using drugs, end quote. Thus, the high from social media becomes more challenging to resist because the brain continuously experiences rushes of pleasure. Social media is especially vulnerable to teenagers and young adults due to the rapid brain growth. The overuse of social media can actually rewire a young child or teen's brain to constantly seek out immediate gratification, leading to obsessive, compulsive, and addictive behaviors, says DeAngelis. This is what can make mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, ADHD, and dysmorphia worse. She continues on. It's extremely important that parents and guardians of young children and teens pay attention to the symptoms of these mental health disorders and take note if the child is spending too much time on their screens or begins to lie about their internet use, end quote. Let's stop. The overuse of social media can rewire a teenager's brain to seek out immediate gratification? No wonder our attention spans are going out the window. With internal problems such as stress and depression, and a combination of the algorithms seeking out the most engaging content to keep you hooked, it is no wonder why and how people are addicted to social media. It's an escape, and a terrible one for that. And it certainly doesn't help when we constantly compare ourselves to our peers on the sites. We tend to believe they are more successful and happier than we are based on what they want us to know about them. Of course, no one wants to post their struggles and mistakes, only their highlights, not their lowlights. Thus, we compare our realistic selves to those who seem flawless and perfect, which leaves many of us dissatisfied with life and overwhelmed with a need to perfect ourselves. And to add to the pile, FOMO, or the fear of missing out, exists, especially on social media. We compare ourselves and see highlights of what we missed out on because we are either busy or uninvited. Why do we fear that we are missing out? Simply put, we fear that we are forgotten, or that no one misses us and cares that we were not there. That is why we compulsively check Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter to ensure we aren't missing out. And there goes our self-esteem. If only we learned that we wouldn't miss out on anything besides living our lives. So, we know social media addiction exists. We always knew. But another addiction is still questionable today. Regardless of the controversy, we subconsciously see another demon lurking in the depths: pornography addiction. In this predicament, loneliness is often a driver of such obsession and can be intensified by using it simultaneously. Compared to social media addiction, porn addiction activates the sexual system, providing a dopamine rush to overshadow negative feelings. It brings sexual arousal to offer a quick fix to internal problems. Mind you, the sexual system is intended to support conception and emotional bonding between two partners, not form a false relationship with fake actors. The brain is tricked into believing an authentic relationship experience occurs, and porn provides temporary relief. Keyword: temporary. This relief is quickly overwhelmed by a void of a genuine relationship and transitions into loneliness. That's how pornography exploits the brain's sexual system. It masks loneliness, and once the relief is over, you still find yourself in an empty room, alone. Then you feel guilty and blank inside and decide to do it again to feel that quick dopamine rush. Thus, a vicious cycle traps you. Of course, there are many causes for pornography addiction, such as coping with stress, depression, anxiety, boredom, arousal, and loneliness. All of them are negative feelings and emotional states that can trap you in addiction. But even then, loneliness may not be why one gets addicted to porn. However, it can surely lead you to it. The example we discussed earlier is the finest but not the only example of how pornography can bring you loneliness. You convinced your brain you had an authentic connection with someone, but that was a lie. After the deed is done, however, you feel nothing but emptiness inside. The illusion leads you to believe you're successful in your social life, with tons of connection, but only vapid, meaningless sex which you never even had in the first place. The antithesis of loneliness is connection. Porn only focuses on parts rather than people and their character, nature, and personalities. Henceforth, it is designed for loneliness as there's no real connection, just a fake facade. It only gets worse if you have problems with your love life, whether you're single or struggling with your partner. You find yourself back at porn to fix your problems. And if you are curious about how pornography is addictive, a 2017 study discovered that changes in the participants' brains when viewing erotic images are consistent with addiction for those who identify themselves with PPU, or problematic pornography use. That's where porn and loneliness are related and then become interlocked as partners to trap addicts in a brutal cycle. During this cycle, the relationship connection and meaning are missing and even pushed away by the user. The more you engage with porn, the more difficult you find in satisfying genuine relationships and intimacy. It's hazardous to young adults because it can mislead their views of sexuality, men and women, relationships, and intimacy. Thus, porn blocks off the ability to form authentic, fulfilling relationships in their lives. Even during healthy relationships, porn addiction can demolish them because it causes the addict to feel ashamed and even lie about their addiction usage to their significant other. And it lowers their partner's self-esteem and relationship quality because it seems to take their place in a relationship. Thus, porn becomes a higher priority than the love of your life. That is where we need to step up and say that porn is no good for us, as it gets in the way of what we truly want: connection. And then we get into internet addiction. As we discuss social media and pornography addiction, none of that is possible without the internet. The internet isn't inherently bad, but we can't deny that it can enable addicts without a limit. At least 6% of the population is considered addicted to the internet. That figure is from 2014, so it is assumed to be much higher than that. And internet addiction encompasses not only porn addiction and social media addiction, but also net compulsion such as gambling, gaming, and simply surfing the web. The key is that the reason why the internet is so addictive is because of three factors: accessibility, control, and excitement. Accessibility because there's such easy access to the internet, which can be done almost anywhere and at any time. Control because the user wants to be in charge of their access when they want to be online, without anyone else knowing. Excitement because simply being online gives off a high, whether it's in video games, social media, pornography, which brings excitement and pleasure. The combination of these factors encourages people and unfortunately addicts to continue being chronically online, for a lack of a better word. And that's not only counting the fact that those addicted to the internet often experience mental health problems, ranging from depression and ADHD to anxiety and OCD. And while technically speaking, there's no formal classification of internet addiction, it is still possible to be addicted. Even an older survey from 2016 by teenagers themselves claims that half are addicted to mobile devices, and 3/4 of which impulsively respond to notifications, such as text. However, Internet addiction, like any other addiction, is possibly derived from a mental health problem as its source, such as depression and ADHD. Case in point, solve the mental pain, fix the addiction. But what if it's the addiction causing the problems rather than vice versa? Another 2016 research study discovered that those considered internet addicts struggle significantly with daily tasks such as work, school, and socialization. To add to the count, these individuals reported having considerably higher depression and anxiety levels than non-addicts. And how does loneliness plot into any of these addictions? It's a positive feedback loop. Any one of these addictions can be both the problem and the solution. Take it like this. You are feeling lonely, so you log into social media to avoid that feeling. It intensifies as you scroll through your feed and feel even more lonely. And a cycle is born. Loneliness often breeds addiction, or on the other side, a consequence of one. That is, in my honest opinion, why loneliness is becoming more common nowadays. These forms of escape and coping do nothing but provide us with unfulfillment, stress, and yes, loneliness. If you weren't lonely before being addicted, then you surely will be if you are. And how do poor mental health, the vastness of the internet, and loneliness all connect? Why did I put these specific factors all together? It is for a reason. Poor mental health, such as depression and anxiety, paired with internet addictions such as social media and pornography, leads to loneliness. But on the path to loneliness is one missing detail: escapism. Everyone has escaped from reality at one point or another, whether it's going on vacation for a week or taking a break from school on the computer. The problem is that escapism is supposed to be temporary, a break from reality like imagined. If the previous factors mesh together, escapism becomes excessive to the point of being borderline permanent. Imagine this scenario. You're not having a good day. Whether it's from school, work, or anything else, either way, your mood is down. This has been occurring for a while, for a few weeks or even for a few months even, and you've been trying to remedy this. The fix? How about your favorite TV show? Or what about your favorite content creators? What about posting on social media? All of these can not only be highly addictive, but binge-worthy, which can be an issue. One study released recently in 2021 focuses on the possible relationship between loneliness and binge-watching, which can symbolize problematic technology usage. This study references older ones who have linked binge-watching television shows with a lack of a social life, poor sleep quality, and being overweight. As noted with binge-watching, there is a gigantic temptation to watch one more episode, and it's applied to social media. Just one more video, just one more post, just one more message. As explained earlier, you know how devastating and addictive technology, mainly social media and TV, can be. The study hypothesized that only escapism out of a few factors would mediate loneliness and specifically identification with media characters, which would predict more significant binge-watching trends. Study participants estimated their typical media usage by reporting how many hours they spent per day surfing the internet, leisure work, or watching television on a scale of 0 to 24 hours. Moreover, they reported which streaming services they used, which devices they used to watch TV series, and which days, weekdays or weekends, they usually watched them. 4 scales were used to conduct the study: loneliness, problematic uses of internet-related technologies, identification with media characters, and binge-watching tendencies. The results? Participants reported spending, on average, around 8 hours per day using the internet and 2.5 hours watching television. That's 10.5 hours per day using screens. And to no surprise, loneliness was positively associated with the tendency to binge watch. Escapism was significantly correlated to identification with the TV series characters and also positively correlated with the binge watching tendency. Let's rewind. Between the past decade, streaming platforms spread like wildfire due to the abundance of fast network connections. These platforms offer easy access to an extensive library of digital media content, such as movies and TV shows. Netflix, the giant of streaming services, promotes this new idea of binge watching and seeks to normalize it as a new way of viewing television. And underlying binge watching loneliness is a determinant of this behavior through escapism. This study states that higher feelings of loneliness are associated with higher levels of problematic use of digital technologies. However, only escapism can accurately predict binge-watching tendencies. They speculate that an excessive consumption of streaming TV series could be interpreted as a behavioral coping strategy for media escapists. It is worth noting that simply escaping from reality to watch a TV show for a half hour isn't problematic. And escapism is one of the most common motivations for seeking out streaming services. The reason why binge watching is a compelling coping strategy is because it requires low effort. And to add to that, you are more likely to adopt binge watching behaviors when you're physically or mentally exhausted. Binge watching is how people experiencing loneliness use escapism to cope with their unfulfilled social life or lack thereof as they identify with fictional characters. As binge watching is easy to continue once it starts, it is more demanding to stop watching the show than to continue viewing it. Now, to bring the study and the premise of this video together, the participants' age served as a significant predictor of the link between loneliness and binge watching. Since age is negatively associated with loneliness in this study, adolescence is the peak age for experiencing loneliness. It is worth noting that the study states that no conclusions about causality can be drawn, but it strongly suggests that loneliness and binge watching are connected, whether it's reciprocal or not. It concludes that we shouldn't avoid using modern online technologies, but instead continue to find ways to design them to better cope with unfavorable circumstances, while simultaneously avoiding the binge watching tendency. That was a lot to take in, wasn't it? That was just one study too. Don't worry, I've covered you if you missed some vital information. What you need to know out of anything in the study is that it appears loneliness and behavior like binge watching are connected. But it's escapism out of many factors that predicted the best. Two scenarios are possible but end the same way. Loneliness causes escaping from the world to escape struggle and suffering, which turns into problematic technology usage such as binge watching. And the other is that escapism causes loneliness. Either way, you're worse off than before if you continue to engage in this behavior. So you might be disheartened, defeated even. How could everyone my age and I stop being so lonely? The solution itself is simple, but the path is not. As we have discussed, two types of loneliness are predominant today. Mental loneliness is lonely in the mind, but isolative loneliness is lonely both mind and being. Mental loneliness covers conditions such as depression and anxiety, and explains how one becomes lonely in the mind. Isolative loneliness covers the power of the rise of the internet that leads to us completely isolating ourselves from the outside world when we engage in internet addictions and problematic escapism. So, what's the solution to this mess? A plan. That's the solution. There's no quick and easy fix, but it is a relatively simple, albeit lengthy, plan. So you must be patient. It can take many weeks, months, or even years. Once again, I need to reiterate that I am not a mental health professional. Anything I recommend, you should take with a grain of salt. Depending on if you're suffering from depression or anxiety, an addiction, or excessive escapism, the plan will be similar but different. For issues such as depression, anxiety, and other disorders diagnosed by a doctor, I advise you to contact a therapist, psychiatrist, or any other mental health professional to determine how to combat your loneliness. A straightforward plan. See where it goes from there and follow their advice. As for addictions, find out why you're seeking, as an example, social media and pornography in excessive amounts in the first place. Is loneliness causing the addiction, or is the addiction causing your loneliness? Or could it be both? Discover the state of mind you're in when you do such compulsions. Are you lonely, depressed, stressed, angry, or sad, or any combination of them? Chances are that you need an appropriate coping strategy for life's troubles. Replace the time spent doing addictions with productive coping strategies such as meditation, writing, exercise, and self-care. That way, you'll be too busy to consider partaking in your obsessions. Seriously limit your screen time by setting a limit on your devices. If social media and pornography makes you worse, delete social media and block adult content. If any problem persists, consider consulting with a professional to resolve your addictions. Since escapism is identical to addictions, at least in its motives, the strategy is the same in limiting your time spent escaping. Remember again, escapism isn't inherently wrong. Why do you think we go on vacations? Instead of binge watching your favorite show for hours, do something productive, such as exercise or completing that assignment, and then reward yourself with your show. That's where delayed gratification comes into play. The more you wait for the reward, the better it feels. So practice delayed gratification in your life and see the results after a few weeks to compare how much better you are. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. After you complete these steps, focus on the antithesis of loneliness, connection. Who's in my life that I can deepen my relationship with? When was the last time I talked to them? And who else can I meet to form a bond with? Consider your attitudes, interests, and values and seek out people who share them. Follow quality relationships rather than that of quantity. You want connection, not seclusion. It doesn't matter how many friends you have, but how close you are to them. Put yourself in the gym, school, and volunteer work and be optimistic. You will experience rejection, that is a fact of life. But don't put yourself down over it. It happens to everyone. Think about it like this. Who would want to be friends with someone who is continually pessimistic about life? Who would constantly bring their mood down? So practice optimism not just for their sake, but most importantly, for yours. That doesn't mean you are blind to reality, far from it. Optimism means you are aware of reality, but hopeful regardless of any outcome. Be the shining light in your and people's lives because you don't want anyone else to experience what you endured. And anyway, having a positive outlook on life proves its benefits as your quality of thoughts become more positive and uplifting rather than depressed and negative. Above all, realize that loneliness is a sign that your life is not working as it should. Be grateful for the sign. You know something needs to change, and change starts with you. As long as you're working to improve your life, you'll do well. Because at the end of the day, only you have the power to make what's right. I would like to thank Mrs. Jody Dojonovic for graciously providing Thomas a story, as he was your loving son who loved you and your family more than life itself. May his sheer positivity remind you that there's always hope in this world, and that all of us can be the shining beacon in someone's life. Please consider supporting Project Spread Positivity, which honors Thomas Dojonovic's message to spread positivity everywhere you go. With that said, thank you for watching, and may we meet again.